It was the winter of 1980, kind of like a night like this, maybe a little bit colder, when I went to New York City to check out acting schools and colleges. See, I wanted to be an actress for as long as I could remember, and growing up Jewish in Miami Beach, I had been acting with the Temple Beth Shalom Players, as you do. And with the Temple Beth Shalom Players, we had done all of the great pieces of theater in the American canon, everything from Fiddler on the Roof to Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. The favorite show that we did was Milk and Honey. That was a Jerry Herman musical that had first premiered the year I was born, 1961, on Broadway. Now, Milk and Honey was about middle-aged women who went to Israel to get married. They were all divorced, and find husbands and then presumably stay there. And it was performed by a group of us, of about 4 of us girls, average age 14. And the play didn't really make a lick of sense because it would have meant schlepping suitcases across the Sinai, but you know, this was the Temple Beth Shalom Players, and that was really the extent of my theater background. So I go to New York, and I'm following my high school boyfriend who was at NYU studying with the experimental theater. I get to New York, and he takes me to see a student production. It's in a black box theater, no set, no lighting, no costumes. I had never seen anything like that at Temple Beth Shalom. There were 2 actors, and they were talking at the same time. We weren't allowed to do that at Temple Beth Shalom. And there was cursing, and there were some sort of exchanges of bodily fluids. It looked kind of unhygienic, definitely not kosher. And in the middle of the play, they had a pizza delivered. A pizza guy came, and they collected money from the audience, and they shared the pizza with us, and then they just kept talking, and I had never seen anything like it. I didn't know what the hell they were doing, but I just thought, this is what I want to do with my life. So, I was so lucky that NYU accepted me because the only other school that I applied to was Juilliard, and they were very confused why an 18-year-old would be doing a monologue from Milk and Honey. So I go to NYU, and I quickly find out that this experimental avant-garde theater was not just a crazy little notion. What it was a reaction against an art that had come previously. It was based on the avant-garde theater movement that was a reaction to Dadaism and Cubism. And it was pioneered by French surrealist playwright Antonin Artaud in the 1920s, who with his very seminal work, Theater of Cruelty, had posited the idea that theater in the Western world had fallen into a lassitude and needed a lacerating wake-up call. Now, as it turns out, not everyone goes to the theater for an assault on the senses. And Artaud ended his days in a straitjacket in a mental institution. But he still remains one of the most influential of all thinkers in the avant-garde theater. Now, when I moved to New York, it was the tail end of the heyday of this movement. It was the 1980s, and the real heyday was the 1970s, but I still got to see these amazing productions like Peter Brook's production of Carmen at Lincoln Center. It was staged like a bullfight. It was a dirt floor. They had a bonfire in the middle, and Carmen smoked cigarettes while she sang. It was just mind-blowing. Now, I was studying with Richard Schechner, who was one of the avatars of this movement, and Schechner was influenced by an even more ancient idea, way back, even before the Greeks had pioneered the idea of theater as catharsis. Richard Schechner was looking to the ancient world. And you know, you have to imagine the ancient world was a terrifying place, right? Before science, you would never know why things were happening. There would be a thunderstorm, and you'd think it was a punishment from God. Who knew anything? So in this ancient world, tribes came up with an idea to make rituals, collective rituals, and they would make a poetic world that existed at the same time as the natural world. And this sacred suspension of time that they would share together created what they call a liminal state, a time out of time. And this sharing of this time out of time created what anthropologists call collective effervescence, and that's this breaking down of the boundaries between self and group. And I just love this idea. I never heard anything like that at Temple Beshalom. And that's why people were doing these things like having a pizza delivered in the middle of a show. But it was the 1980s, and this kind of theater just wasn't being supported in New York anymore. The movie Wall Street came out with its tagline, "Greed is good," and small theaters were closing. And so I went to work in television. And the funny thing is that in some sense, back in that day, television was still a form of ritualized behavior that people used to watch together when there were like 5 channels and no DVR. Which is why Carol Burnett, she didn't say at the end of her show, "I'm so glad I had this time to do this sketch at you." Right? No, what she said was, "I'm so glad we had this time together." Because the audience felt included, especially when they would crack up and they couldn't keep going with the sketch. But you felt included in watching television. And the funny thing is now, we're in this golden age of television again, where there's so much great stuff, but we're all watching it on screens alone. And so this internet that was going to bring us all together just makes us feel so much less connected. So for me, I've returned to the theater as much as I can, or to live events like this, where you get that collective togetherness feeling. And I feel like it's more important than ever, even though every time I do it, it doesn't always work out so well. Recently, I was invited to do this one-person show I was doing in Los Angeles at the Edinburgh Theatre Festival. And I was really excited about it. And I get there, and the producers had found an apartment for me with bad plumbing, and the mattress didn't even have a top mat. It was just a box spring. So I was tossing and turning all night. But the theater was this beautiful little black box theater that was located on a side street with absolutely no foot traffic. And because my show was sandwiched between larger productions, I had these incredibly tantalizing start times, the curtain times, that were ensured to bring in a great audience. So my show would go up at 11:27 a.m. or 6:23 in the evening. And so very few people were coming to see my show. But I was trying to keep my spirit up. And then one day, it was the 2:42 production. There were 4 people in the theater. And 15 minutes in, there were 2 people in the theater. And it's really hard to see a comedy and to do a comedy when there's no one in the audience. So I stopped the show, and I just turned to the couple and I said, "Hey, do you want me to go on, or do you want to go get a drink, or do you want to get a coffee? I don't know, it's 2:53 in the afternoon, maybe we should, start drinking." And they said, no, we love it, go on. And I noticed that the woman was really pregnant, and I thought, maybe they just want to sit down. So I continued with the show, and I finished the show, and afterwards they hugged me. And the stage manager came over, and she said, "I think that show went really well. I don't know if the audience could see it, but I did notice the tears rolling down your face the whole time." And I thought, Yeah, I was about 2 feet from them, so pretty sure they saw the tears. And I went out that night, and I did some drinking. I did a lot of drinking, and then I tossed and turned all night on that box spring. And the next morning, I got up, and I caught a bus, and I went out to the local hospital, intending to check myself in for a psychiatric evaluation. And I got to the hospital, and the waiting room in the emergency room was really filled with people who looked like they had had even more to drink than me the night before. And I waited in line, and I went up to the woman behind the counter, and I said, "Hi, I'm an American actress, and I'm here with the festival, and I think I might be losing my mind." And either they see a lot of this kind of thing, or they've never seen anything like it, because she didn't ask me a single question. She just said, "Well, it's going to be a really long wait." So I sat down, and I looked around, and I realized everybody there was there with someone. You know, I was the only person who was there by themselves. And I thought about how terrifying these times are, and how scary and powerless, just like the ancient world I've been feeling. And what was gonna save us? Maybe, just maybe, some of that collective effervescence, that community bonding. And I thought about how few people were coming to see my show, but that those 2 people in that audience, they would probably never forget the comedy show they saw, that the comedian cried the entire time and they were the only people in the house. And I knew I would never forget that. And I realized that on the entire country, there was only one place where people might be showing up to connect with me. So maybe I should be there. So I got back on the bus. I went and found a hotel that had a really good mattress. And I showed up for the 6:17 performance. Thank you.